Yeah,
Okay. I mean, I can just do that later.
Yeah,
It's not really a big deal. It's just something I
sure.
know I need to take care of.
Well, I can actually just talk through real quickly the theory behind that, or sort of what's happening here. And then this hopefully is helping people as well. And if this is sort of confusing you, then you know, please feel free to talk to me, and I can go as slow as you want. That's the whole point of office hour, right? Let me try to get the cool tools and
Thank you.
see. Nah, this is fine. Let's use this. Okay, so let's pretend, not pretend, but we are going to have a, this is what our GitHub, I wish I could do repository. I wish I could do dark mode. This is kind of killing me. I've also never used this guy right here. What are all these? These are crazy. This is actually intense. Cool. So here's your GitHub repository, right? And we've talked about on Git, you make this repository. And we're like, well, what does that mean? Let's see if I can make it bigger. It's too big. There we go. And so the way GitHub works, and this is, you guys are going to learn more. Yes, I would absolutely say you should go to Melissa's courses. They're great. She's really good. She's really passionate about GitHub. It is a tool you're going to have to use. And the idea is like, not just GitHub. Again, there's other ones. There's Code Commit, there's GitLab, there's, fill in the blank. But they're all the same process. You are doing something called a pull request. You just heard Robert say a cloning. So let's talk a little bit, if that's okay. We can talk for maybe 5-10 minutes about what that looks like and what is happening here. So if I am Robert and he's got 2 computers, let's just lay this out. And what he did is he created notes and pushed these to GitHub. And we walked through how to do that. And so what happens is whenever we walked through how to do GitHub, there was a last thing and it said branch, or two, it was like the second to last thing. And it said git branch -m main, right? What that means is with GitHub, when we push our code, we create this thing called a branch. And what this is when the cloud or anything is looking at our code, it is looking and saying, okay, this is where my code lies. This guy right here, this main branch. Sorry, that's a little bit confusing. This main branch, we're gonna keep that black, and these will be purple. Cool. This is what is called my main. So let me go here. Oh my goodness. Guys, I'm not a great speller. I just need you to know that. So this is my main branch, right? When I push something to GitHub, initially, this is where it starts. Now, the power behind it is, here's my code. What I can do is, if I wanted, let's think about Facebook, for example. They want to implement a new feature, but they want the original code to still be there because they want users to still be able to access Facebook, right? They don't want to break it or tear it down. And so what you can do is you can actually pull something off. Let me actually do something different than a bunch of arrows. We'll do this. And we're going to create something called a branch. We'll call this a branch. Cool. So if I want to try to work on our code, what will happen is I will create a branch. And then this branch is our code base, and I can edit it, right? I can edit it at any point of time. I can sort of play around with it, but it's not going to affect this main branch here. This is just I could have called this like my test branch, or you might hear like staging branch, or, if it's just you could, when you're working on styling, you call it your styling branch. You can kind of call it whatever you want. And it's a way that you can take the code, make a copy of it, and then you can play around with it, but it doesn't affect the actual code that is being hosted, that is being seen and used by your users. Then what happens is once you're done, let's say you create this new feature, you've done your testing, it works, you've gone through QA, it all works, you're good to go. What you then want to do is you want to take your branch and you want to do a merge to your main. And what you're saying is, now I want my users to be able to access it. So now all of a sudden, it's too big. at this point of time is your main branch, and you have your new features in there, right? So this gets merged in. So that's sort of how branching works. And that's at a very high level, what's happening. Now, let's say, are there any questions on this first? Before I sort of get into the next point, and then Robert, the actual point of us bringing this up. Any questions on this? Okay. So let's keep our sort of thing that we're talking about, where we have this test branch, and we've done our feature. We have worked on it. Let's say I work for Facebook and I've created my feature and I'm ready. Well, what can happen, and what often happens is, it's not just one person working on the project. So in the same time, let's say the same time that I wanted my test branch, Gray decided, oh, they wanted to build something else too. They wanted to build out a new friends. They wanted to build out the top 8. If any of you guys remember that for MySpace, they want to build out top 8. So what would Gray do? Let me actually this here. Gray is going to get their branch, top 8 branch. They're going to check it out from our main, and they're going to work on their branch, right? Or they're going to work on their feature. Now, let's say hypothetically, I get done because mine's just a little bit of styling, a little bit of feature stuff, very, very basic compared to Gray's more elaborate, 2-month project. Well, let's say that we both start at the same time, but then Gray's branch doesn't get done till down here. Cool. Now, remember, my code, when I pushed it to production, our codes, we started at the same spot. We started with the same base, right? The same copy. But now, since I've pushed to production, the main code is now different, right? It now has my changes. One of the issues and something that you will really fall into in projects and algorithms, this is just honestly part of it. This is like learning how to work with this, especially when you're in a group project, not on your own, obviously, is Gray gets done with their branch, like, okay, I'm ready to push to production. But if you try to push it to production right here, you're going to get an error. And what the error is going to be is it's going to say, hey, the original main branch that you had, the main copy you had, does not match what is actually there now. It doesn't have these new features that I created, my styling, right? And so what happens then is before Gray can push to production, Gray has to first do a pull request. What this pull request does, it says, okay, great. Before I try to merge this and push this to production, is there anything that's changed? Did anybody add anything? Has there been any styling that's been added? Has there been anything that's different? So then what Gray would do is make a pull request. It's just called like get pull. And then there's a couple different things you do. A pull request. And what it's going to do is it's going to go and it's going to compare the code base that you started with the code base that is currently your main branch. If there are differences, it'll show you what the differences are, and you can decide, yes, I want to merge these. I want to accept these. But then it also helps because you might be working on something and have been working with deprecated code that as you look through it, you go, oh man, I was really dependent on blank and Will changed it. So then it allows you to not break the code as you push it here, right? If you're dependent on something, that's the whole point of why you have to do this. Because let's say I changed in our CSS, I changed a class name and Gray didn't do that, right? And it all of a sudden was going to make our Facebook look terrible. Well, what it does is allows, and it says, okay, do you want to accept these changes? Do you want to accept the class name change? Gray would go through, say, yep, okay, great. Now Gray has got the updated code base, right? And then they can push to production. And then at that point, boom, now our code is fully up to date and it contains both my and Gray's updates. Does that make sense? Are there any questions on that? Just put a 1 in the chat if that makes sense. Cool. So what for you, Robert, is happening is you made a change to your notes. Your other computer doesn't have those changes. And so what it's saying is, wait, let me, and what you were trying to do is push something that was on the old branch. And it's saying, hey, there's new information. So you do a get pull, a pull request is what it's called. You get all that new information, you do the merge, and then you can push it. So yeah, it's a very high level, not in depth. Again, I would really encourage you guys to go to the GitHub sort of breakouts because they're awesome. And it's something that's really going to help you. And when you get comfortable with it, there's also a really great Udemy course. I think it's Colt Steel does like a GitHub, it's like $12. But it is really good for like merging. And then when you have a merge conflict, what that means, and you can kind of go in depth there. So, okay.
Yeah, they're every other Thursday. So obviously not today. So next Thursday, they're going to be on session 3. So yeah, there's 4 in total. And then it's every other Thursday. And now the TAs are doing it because Melissa, she's on another assignment. So, but we have all the videos are there. It's pinned for anyone who didn't know in the chat. So yeah.
Yeah. Is there, Gray, do we have access to those videos?
Yeah, the GitHub ones, yeah.
Okay, I wonder if can we put those on our document?
Yeah.
Like
The
on our-
link is I pinned the link. So the link takes you to like the
perfect.
student.
In Discord you did?
Yeah.
Dude, you're the GOAT. I'm so grateful for you.
Anytime.
Cool. Yeah, so then there are those. Cool. Any other questions on sort of this and what could be happening? Or thoughts on this? Did anybody already know that this is how it all worked?
I do highly encourage everyone to, learn the basics of Git, just to, push. When I say I lost all my Django projects when, back when I was with Will, so I lost it all because my computer clocked out on me.
Yeah.
But all my React stuff was there because I started using it.
Yeah.
So please save your work. You don't want to go through X amount of months in a boot camp. And, listen, she, whatever laptop name is, they lasted for almost 7 years. Okay. Ride or die. It still technically worked, but it got like 5 missing keys. And then sometimes the screen goes glitchy and, but it did its job. Okay. It got me through things.
Hey, we're not, yeah. I believe you. One thing I do want to note, and I saw that this was, somebody had this issue, is let's say I've got, this is a really important thing with Git and GitHub, really, is let's say I've got this overarching folder, and this is what is currently on our GitHub. If you go to our class link and you were to go to the GitHub link, it's February 23 MERN. That is what I've called it. I think that's what I called it. But that's my folder, and that's what I have pushed to GitHub, and it's gonna every week or every lecture, I'll just keep updating it. One thing to note is a big issue that students fall into, and so I'm telling you to not do this, is if I create what I did was I created a repository here at Fab23 MERN, right? I initialized my repository and then I pushed it to GitHub. We're all good to go. Let's say week 1, that's fine. We're crushing it. Then all of a sudden we go to week 2. No big deal. I'm just pushing it like normal. Then I go to week 3. I understand the 2 was capitalized and it also was irking me if it bugs you. So sorry. And everything is normal. Everything is good to go. But I get to week 4 and, it's it's spring and I'm feeling good and I just want to be outside and I don't think through it. And all of a sudden in week 4, I go and I run git init, right? Instead of just doing git push. Instead, hypothetically, let's say that I accidentally initialize a new repository here. This is going to cause me a lot of issue. This is what we call a nested repository, where you've got this code here that you initialize a repository and it lives within an already existing repository. That can cause you a lot of issues. You have to clear your cache. You have to do a couple things. So if you find yourself with like, you see the words nested repository, or, you know, this lives within another one, just know that is a very common thing. TAs are here to help you, but you should not ever initialize a repository inside of another repository. So you don't, if you do this main one, let's say you just have a MERN folder and that's what you want to push, you'll just keep updating that. You don't have to initialize a new repository for each week. Since you've already done it on this main one, you just keep updating and updating from there. Because again, if you try to initialize, it's going to be a nested repository and then it's going to cause a whole bunch of issues within GitHub because it doesn't know. Because then now you're like doing pointers and you're saying, okay, this one is here, but this is here, and it gets very confused.
Oh, since you pointed it out, I kind of want to iterate that when we start to get into like full stack MERN, you know, adding your Express backend, your Mongoose, Bongo stuff, and Node, start your project first and do your git init. Very, very important if you don't want that to happen, because React automatically creates a git inside of the create React app. So if you create your React app and then you create a project and so on and so forth outside of it, and you try to do a git init, now that React, you won't have access to your client folder when you try to push it. Like, it will just look grayed out and you can't actually go into it. That's very, very common. So if it does happen to you, but if you don't remember anything I say, start the project first. So whatever the assignment name is, and just go CD into it and then do create React app. I will get in it and then create React app and everything. So just so you guys know. Like, remember nothing else that I said. Just remember that.
Any questions on this, or am I okay to get rid of this? Is this something you guys want me to, like, it looks like I can download this. Would that be helpful, or no? You guys are good to go. Yeah, there's a video for sure. Cool. Okay, I'm closing the whiteboard. Anybody have any other questions? Anything we can help with?
If no one has anything, I don't know how far ahead you want to get compared to like where we are. There's an assignment that's for next week that I was messing around with, but the solution video and the solution code, they did something different than what they were just preaching about the lesson prior.
Okay. Which assignment is it?
It's the more forms assignment.
Okay. I'm a little hesitant to move forward.
That's fine. I mean, we'll get there eventually. I just figured if we have 30 minutes and there's nothing else.
Yeah. Just transparently, I don't want anybody to kind of also hop in here and then be very confused. But
No worries.
Gray, would you mind hopping in to Chris? If you wanted, Gray can hop into a breakout room for you.
Yeah, you want.
Yeah, I mean, if there's nothing else, and sure, that's fine.
Okay.
Sure. Let me.
Okay, dude. I'm just gonna create just one other breakout room.
Oh, I don't want to auto assign.
Oh, I already opened it up.
Oh, okay.
I just created just one room. So yeah, Chris, you can go into that room one. And I'll see you there.
Oh, you can now broadcast your voice to all places. Wow, this is Zoom's getting legit. Anybody else have any other questions?
What are we going over in the class hour, I guess?
Today we're gonna talk about props, and so you should have everything you need to complete all of your assignments. So we're gonna talk about components, and then we are going to create our first component. We're going to talk about props. We're gonna pass in props. We're gonna understand how data flows within React. Those are gonna be the things that we talk about.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody have anything else?
Just to clarify what Justina was talking about with the Git.
Mhm.
So we make a project folder first and then do Git in it and then create through
Yeah.
npx.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask her about that. I'm not quite exactly sure what she was talking about there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I've never had to do that. If you are creating a new project every time, and you're initializing a new project, maybe that something has changed there. But from my understanding, I've never heard that. So I was going to actually ask her after class exactly
Okay.
what she meant there. So yeah. One thing I wanted to bring up, and I guess I can just share my screen. Give me a second. Let me navigate to it. Yesterday I did something, and I noticed in class that, or in Discord, that somebody had a question, and it was all because I didn't explain this. So I can just explain this real fast. Let me open up my code. Visual Studio Code has been very, very slow today. Okay. Share my screen. Okay, so this was yesterday's assignment, and we talked in this main.js, did a couple different things. Read me. Like that. In this main.js, we talked about our destructuring, and we talked about our arrow functions. One thing I wanted to bring up with you guys is that here in JavaScript, if you aren't familiar with JavaScript or it's been a while with JavaScript, if I want to inject, you can kind of think about from like Python, like an F string. If I want to inject a variable here, there's two things that have to happen. This is just with vanilla JavaScript. It's going to look a little bit different when we're dealing with components. But just with JavaScript, I have to put this $sign and then the curly brackets around the variable. And then I also have to do a backtick. Now this looks very similar to an apostrophe, obviously, but it is a backtick. It is the key right above your left tab. And by doing those backticks, that's what it allows us, and with the $sign in the name, that allows us to call this variable within here, within this string. I just know that caused some confusion for some students yesterday. Like, oh, this isn't coming up, but they had it like this. And so that's not going to work. You can see even that it automatically takes it from red, which red was indicating, okay, we're reading this variable, to, okay, it's just going to print out hello $sign. It looks like it's just part of the string itself, right? But you do want to do a backtick here. And then the backtick now allows me to actually call a variable within my string. Any questions on that? Cool. Yeah, I just know that in Discord, somebody had asked that. And I just thought, oh, I should bring that up because I didn't talk about that. So. Anybody got anything else?
I guess in the industry, do people like just not use var anymore? Like instead just use let, or
It
so you can
depends.
still use var for like global and then let for scope?
Yeah, so it totally depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Let's see if we can actually just do a few things. I'm actually gonna share my screen again and we'll just jump into that. So what will happen here is if I were to say something like var first name equals will. Right? Then all of a sudden I've got some function. And I'm gonna say function, you know, some function. Oh, not like that. And what I want to do is say, oh, it's because I spelled this wrong. Like I told you guys, I can never spell function correctly. And then I wanted to say var first name equals John, or like, yeah, let's say like first name equals John. And then I want to end this. And I want to console.log first name. What will happen here is, let's see. Here it says will, and I can't reassign this. So it's not going to reassign it right now just because I said first name equals John. That's just me declaring within my scope. But what var would do is if I wanted to change, let's say will was my first name, and then I had a function that took in that value and I wanted to reassign it. Now, outside of this, if I were to run it, oh, it says will still. It should. Values never read. Oh, it's because I'm within this. Console.log. First name. So here we go.
You have to call the function, right?
Oh, duh, that's what it is. Sorry about that. That's what it is. Okay, let's actually get rid of this. So let's see. That says will, though it should have changed. So I'm not seeing exactly. Because what should have happened is var you can actually redeclare. And that's sort of part of the issue of why they moved to let, is because if I were to say let first name equal John, this is only existent within the block scope. And so if I just wanted to change it temporarily and then keep it as like, this is my constant, or not constant, I guess, but I wanted to keep it as var, then I could just use let and it only exists. And then anytime I get outside of the function, then it still stays as will. But I'm confused as to why this should have changed based on John will. Huh. Honestly, friends, I'm sort of stumped on why. Because this should have, that was a big issue, is it kept rewriting this guy. I wonder if I change this. I wonder if because I was redeclaring, it only existed within that scope. Yeah, so there it is. Sorry, that was my issue. So the issue was when I was declaring this. Okay, let me backtrack. I was so confused right there. It's because I wasn't calling the function and then I thought I had to redeclare it. Okay, let's backtrack a little bit. When I have var and I'm declaring this here, var first name will. This is a global variable, right? It is accessible. It's up here and it's accessible within functions. So if I'm going inside of there, it is accessible. Now, because I don't say var, when I was saying var, part of the issue was that I was redeclaring a new variable called first name. And when I redeclare a variable within a function, that's where it exists, right? And so they were different in theory because it only existed within this function and it did not overwrite this. Now, because this is a var, I can change this within this function. And then as you can see, it changes it outside of this function. Now, if I were to say something like this, let first name equal John. What this allows is for me to still keep this value. But while I'm in this function, I can actually reassign the variable. And so if I'm here and I run this, it should say John and Will. Yeah. So that is what the big difference is. I know that probably was confusing because I got confused there for a very second. Is actually in industry, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish within your function. If you just need something temporarily, then you're always going to use let. Let is honestly the more common. Like very, very rarely do people use var. It's still acceptable, but the reason we changed from var to let and const is because it actually prevents us from rewriting our stuff. If something's supposed to be a constant variable and accidentally gets overwritten, that is a big issue. You can think of it if you have like a gateway that you're trying to send something to, or you have like a, like an IP address that you always want something to be static. This is what it is and it cannot change. If we're using var, then anything we accidentally, if we have like, a brand new person come in and they accidentally override it, then it overwrites everything. Well, const doesn't allow that, right? Because it is mutable or immutable. And so let and const is kind of how I would approach it. Not kind of, that is how I approach it. var is still able, you're still able to do that. But I would practice and move forward with let and const. Sorry that I got a little bit confused right there.
Thanks.
Did that help, or was that more confusing? If we're
No, that
being-
was good. Thanks.
Okay, yeah. Cool. Somebody asked, why do we not have to type console.log some function? Great question, Jennifer. Sorry, you did direct message. The reason is because right here, when I'm calling this function, JavaScript goes from top to bottom. So it's going to read this and says, okay, great. I've got a variable. I've got a function. There is this thing called sort of hoisting, but we don't need to worry about that. And then once it reads this function, it basically knows, okay, I have a function, but I don't need to do anything until it's actually called, right? And so once it gets to line 144, because it skipped over 140 to 143, once it gets to 144, it says, oh yeah, I remember having that function. Let's go ahead and do whatever it says. So we get to line 144, it reads this, it hops up to this function. It says, okay, some function. Okay, let first name equals John. Okay, I remember that. And then within our function, we said to console.log first name. So because the function's running, part of that function running is to console log. It's not returning anything. Like if I didn't have this console log and I just said return first name, then you're exactly right. I would have to say console.log some function. And this would provide the same thing. It would provide John and it would provide Will. But because my console log was within my function, I don't have to console log it. In fact, does anybody know what it would give if I did console log? Any guesses? Let's go back there. If I did console.log this, what are your guys' guesses? No. Anybody else have a guess? I talked about two different types or an error. Okay. You can already see that it is giving me an error. So I've got null and undefined as my thoughts, and I think those are great, right? Undefined. What is happening is it's console logging John, cool. But then it's trying to console.log what the value of the function is. But because my function doesn't return anything, saying it's undefined. It has no return, it has no value. The minute I say return 5, and I run this, now you can see my error goes away. If I run this, I should get John 5 Will. But if I'm trying to console.log Anytime we run a function, remember the function becomes whatever it returns. And then also importantly, if I were to say this, what do you guys think the output would be? Anybody have a guess? Is it going to give me John 5 Will or 5 John Will? Or what do we think? Somebody says 5 John. Okay. Somebody says 5 Will, 5 Will. Anybody think it's going to be all three? 5 undefined Will. For the people who said 5 Will or 5 Will, can you guys explain what are your thoughts here? What are you thinking is going to happen? Can anybody want to come off mute? Anybody want to be brave and say, kind of explain their thought?
Well, return ends the function. So once that happens, it's over with. So there won't be any console log first name.
Yeah.
And then you're console logging some function, which is going to
Yeah,
return
that's
a
exact-
value of 5, and then console log first name.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Robert. Whenever a function meets a return, it could have a million lines of code under it. The minute it meets a return, it's done running. And it gives back, and it becomes that value. So here, whenever I say console log some function, it's running my function. It's creating this first name, John. And then it gets to return 5. Because this is a return, it says, okay, this value is 5 and it's done running. Therefore, it console logs 5. But it never gets to this console log line because the return was above it. So therefore, that is why we would get 5 will. Does that make sense? Anybody have questions on that?
I have a question. If you tried to redefine var first name outside of that function, but you didn't use var, would that still work? Like
It
you called
does.
var first name equals will. If you did like let first name equals will, would that
Ooh,
overwrite that?
let's see.
Or gray, whatever.
Wow, that is crazy. That is Copilot knowing that gray is RTA. That is nuts. Wow, that's crazy. Let's see. So that is part of var and let and part of the difference. Let's see. Let's just see what happens. I don't actually know. Because I know with var, if I were to say var first name gray, then that would actually work again. Like you can redeclare a var, but let actually doesn't allow you to do that. So let's see what happens. Okay, so it gives me an error. So it's saying first name already exists. So if this was a var, and this is part of the difference too, first name gray. Now if I run this, should just give me 5 gray. So that is a big difference between var and let. Is var, if you have var, you can actually redeclare a variable. And that's a big issue, right? Because somewhere in your code, you know, some developer might have thought of first name that was now a global variable and is being used in another piece of your code. And then you maybe haven't looked at all of the code that's working. And then you're like, oh, first name, that's a great variable name. And so you declare a variable first name, and now it actually changes it in another area. That's a big reason why they moved to let. Because if this was let, it doesn't allow you to redefine or redeclare a variable. You can already see it's giving me red. It doesn't allow this, you're going to get an error. And so it's just another way that let, by using let, it is helping you prevent redefining a variable. Now you can change it. So if I just said first name equals gray, that'll work. That'll work just fine. Like that's okay. I run this. But it's just the redeclaration part. var allows you to redeclare, let does not. Again, that is a powerful and important thing. Any other quick questions on this? Can I just ask how comfortable, just on a scale of 1 to 10, are you guys on like for loops and while loops? You guys put that in the chat for me. Or if you don't want to do it, you can DM me. That's okay too. Just on like for loops and while loops, because I do understand some people are coming from different areas. Okay. So maybe what I'll do is this next office hour on Tuesday, we'll just do a quick run through of a for loop because we are going to use loops throughout this course, and it's just an important thing to know. So we'll do it we'll do a for and a while loop, and then we'll do a couple different things that we can learn, and it might be yeah, there's a couple different things that we'll because we're going to end up using those. Like we'll use try catches and stuff like that that you can integrate into a for loop, which will be kind of cool. So I want to make sure that you guys are really up and running on loops. So we'll do that on Tuesday. Any other questions before we kind of take a quick break and then get started with class? Hopefully this helped. I hope that that was a helpful sort of walkthrough. Sorry, I got a little bit confused there for a second. Cool. Well, I'll stop the recording here.